Pearson Insight webinar number 15, which is on recruiting apprentices. If this is the first time you've attended one of these webinars, we hope you find it useful, and if you've joined us before, then welcome back. Apprentice recruitment is obviously a necessary step in any apprenticeships program, and it can be closely connected with the decision-making process around introducing apprenticeships themselves, particularly where an employer is looking at new ways to attract and recruit talent. Though, of course, we should not overlook the fact that recruitment into apprenticeship programs can also target existing staff as a way of workforce upskilling and development, and you'll see some information on that later. For this reason, as anyone who has joined previous webinars will have seen, we will firstly address the topic from an overarching goals and strategy perspective. The rationale there is that if the apprenticeship strategy is clear and has buy-in from senior management, then everything else that's needed to make apprenticeships a reality should flow from this, including the recruitment. As employers, you will already have recruitment strategies and processes in place. So hopefully what's discussed today will resonate with these, and you'll be able to see how apprenticeships can be integrated into what you already have. So in this sense, it's not necessarily about starting from scratch, but rather enhancing and expanding what's already in place. So who are your presenters for today? I'm Joe Abbasi. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager focused on employers in Pearson's Apprenticeships and Work-Based Learning team. And I'm pleased to be joined by Anne Ashworth, who is our Head of Internal Apprenticeships and has 30 years experience in the skills and workforce development sector. We will also be joined by Kirsty Townley, who's a talent advisor here at Pearson, with a focus on recruiting apprentices onto the programs that Anne runs. We also have Scott Hill from Babington, who are a leading apprenticeships training provider. Scott works with Kirsty on apprenticeship recruitment, and Babington provide the training for some of Pearson's apprentices. And finally, we have Zara Murji from BDO, who are a global accountancy and businesses services firm. She may correct me on that later if I haven't quite got that right. Zara's role focuses on what's known as early in-career recruitment for BDO, which includes apprenticeships, among other things. Okay, I'd like to briefly tell you a little bit about Pearson and why we kind of feel qualified to run webinars like this one, providing advice and information around apprenticeships. So not only are we an employer of apprenticeships, we're also a leading provider of apprenticeship services, along with being the largest awarding organisation in the UK. You may know of us for our qualification brands such as Edexcel and BTEC, as well as being the owner of newer initiatives like the private university Pearson College. And we have around 3,000 to 4,000 employees in the UK, some of whom are apprentices. I also wanted to briefly highlight our apprenticeships programme as a context for the advice and guidance we're providing here. We are a levy payer who launched apprenticeships back in May 2017 with 30 apprentices. We've since grown that number to 120, which has actually exceeded the target we set ourselves for the year for 100, so ahead of our plan basically. And the apprenticeships we run span 16 programmes, going from level 2 all the way up to level 7, which is equivalent to master's degree level. And we use a mixture of frameworks and standards apprenticeships. So today's schedule, firstly, Anne is going to take you through the strategic view of apprenticeships recruitment, ensuring that it is being considered as part of wider thinking and planning around other types of recruitment and roles. Then Kirsty is going to look at how that strategic approach translates into the approach and processes Pearson uses for recruiting apprentices. Scott will then take you through Babington's approach to supporting employers with apprenticeship recruitment. And finally, Zara will provide an overview of what BDO does in this area, which will allow for some compare and contrast with the Pearson approach. Just to quickly reiterate at this point, you can ask questions via the questions box in the menu at any time. And we'll be keeping an eye on those with a view to posing them to presenters when the opportunity arises. I'm going to hand over to our first presenter, Anne, to talk to you about the strategic view.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start off potentially posing a number of questions to you, and I make no apologies for that because there are a number of things that we need to consider. So before you can even start thinking about your apprenticeship programme, you need to make some decisions to ensure that you can maximise the opportunity that the levy is presenting to you. So I think the first thing is really, decisions that you make about your workforce. You've got to think about recruitment, but you've also got to think about career progression. Really quite self-explanatory, but where does apprenticeships come into this? Who's involved? How much lead-in time do you need to have to put everything into place that you want to put into place? And that's probably why some employers have yet to make a full decision on whether they are going with apprenticeships or not. So many large employers have several programs already in existence, some very embedded, some less so. But nonetheless, a decision needs to be taken as to where apprenticeships fit. Do they replace any of these schemes? And if so, how would that work? How much work is going to be needed to change the way you do this, or do they work well alongside? And if so, how is this going to work? From our perspective, we didn't replace any of our L&D content. We're actually working alongside. So we've mapped where our L&D is appropriate to either prepare somebody for an apprentice or move between apprenticeships into professional upskilling and then perhaps into another apprenticeship. So are you just going to upskill existing staff? And generally that is a first quick win for any employer. Do you want to embrace recruiting into apprenticeships roles? And if so, then do you naturally have roles in the business at the right level, job role aligned to standards, an ability to have those roles as training roles? So quite a number of things to think about there. And we certainly needed to think about that because we'd never recruited into apprenticeship roles before. What will you need to change, if anything? Will you need to consider young people into apprenticeship roles? And perhaps as an employer, that's the first time you've really looked at young people coming into your company. Then you've got systems. So what systems do you use in recruitment and HR? And are they able to track apprenticeship information? Some examples for you would be age, gender, ethnicity, location, special learning needs. And can you actually capture unsuccessful candidates to inform your decision making about attraction, for example? And can your systems link to your training providers' systems and provide accurate information to inform recruitment strategies going forward? As you can probably gather, I asked those questions of us. And yes, we're still working on some of the answers to those. And remember, your training providers are an invaluable partner in recruiting both internally and externally. So plan how you're going to involve them and use their expertise. So the benefits of recruiting apprentices then, it might be that you're an organisation that's always recruited into training roles such as internships, graduateships, and the idea of extending to apprentices is really simple. However, you might be an organisation where you haven't really brought people into your business that need training to do their role. They're generally already qualified and experienced. Apprenticeships will be a very new thing for you. And that means that you absolutely need to consider the business benefits. If recruiting apprentices for the first time, your attraction strategy will need to adapt. You might find you need to engage with schools more, or for the first time. How are you going to do that? Do you have the resources to do that? That was certainly something we needed to address, and we certainly don't have resources easily to hand for it, but we have found ways of getting ourselves more known within schools local to our sites. Your apprenticeship vacancies might need to be seen in different places to where your other vacancies normally go. So that might mean working with different websites and different organisations. Your talent acquisition team might need training on apprenticeships. Certainly content around eligibility and then the types of strategies that are going to be effective. You might find you want to use your apprenticeship programme to enhance other business objectives or to engage with other bodies or networks that you don't normally work with. An example might be that you're keen to promote your apprenticeship vacancy to young people that wouldn't normally consider you for a career, such as care leavers, permanently excluded school leavers. This means you may need to work with professional bodies, so who can actually share their expertise with you. Again, really helpful to embed them in your recruitment process. Hiring managers are going to probably struggle at first to change their views when engaging apprenticeships. They will need guidance and training on how to adjust language and process to encourage a more diverse range of people to apply for apprenticeship roles. They might need to change the way they approach interviews and assessment centres, for example. Candidates for apprenticeship roles might not have a lot of business experience, so language, scenarios, etc. will need to be adjusted. And don't forget here, I'm not just talking about young people, but actually more mature people that might be coming back into the employment pool and are looking at apprenticeships as an ideal route. We're obviously seeing quite an increase in the number of graduates that are coming forward for apprenticeship roles as well. And that also means that you need to adapt the way you approach your assessment centres. So attracting candidates to apprenticeships. This slide is really very self-explanatory, so I'm not really going to go into great depth on anything, but I just thought I might share with you an example of where we've started to work with a multi-academy trust who are experts in STEM, so science, technology, engineering and mathematics. They've actually got involved with a website and it's a website provided to multi-academy trusts where they can upload their work experience opportunities, and then employers like us who work with them can also link our apprenticeship vacancies into the site. So we've joined free as a linked employer, and we're putting information onto the site to help the students decide whether they want to come to us for work experience and also apprenticeships. We're particularly keen because this is a STEM school, and we really do want to be part of the move to encourage more women into technology and associated subjects. But also we think there's some great offshoots, in particular regard to our type of business, where we have a number of technology teams around the business. We do a lot of creative and digital. And yes, we do actually have an element of engineering up in our North of England site where we process exam papers. So we think we actually could do some great work with this school. And again, this is an example where we've never done anything like this before, but using this website could be a very interesting way to engage with those students. So one thing that's really imperative as much as you can is to embed what you do into normal everyday working practices. Obviously, you can't do everything at once, so you've got to make some decisions as to what is doable without too much trouble and what needs to start now so it's in place at some point in the future. And talking from experience, I would say that's generally around systems. Systems change, systems updating, particularly to do with recruitment and HR systems. Think broad and ensure that you've captured everything that you might need to consider and review. Think about things you might need to slightly tweak or change. And again, think about what you can achieve quickly and simply, but meets funding rules requirements and gets you off the ground in a sensible and manageable way. Yes, it would be ideal to have everything ready to go, but that does mean you're going to have a very large lead-in time. And as an employer, if you're paying the levy, the longer your lead-in time, the less likely you are to be able to keep the money in your levy pot before it gets paid back to the government. So do think very carefully about how you want to go about attracting, thinking about your recruitment selection. We set up a project plan team. I strongly suggest that that's something that worked very well for us. You put all the expertise together, might be something that you consider for this. So the training provider then, absolutely critical to enabling you to be successful with your recruitment. So if you are using a training provider, of course, some of you might not, some of you might be employer providers already, but if you've decided to use training providers, then get them involved in your attraction, your recruitment and your selection, and get them involved as soon as possible. We couldn't to start with because obviously we started very, very early. But the more our program has evolved, the closer our training providers have come to work with us on all aspects of this. And we actually ran an evaluation of our recruitment process in the early part of this year. And we couldn't have done it without our providers. They were absolutely superb in helping us to really streamline it, make it more effective, make sure the communications were very solid. We're not necessarily the experts in this, the employer. They are, and they can elevate a lot of problems, questions, queries, ensure that everything runs smoothly. They're experts in apprenticeships, and they can guide you through how the ESFA works, eligibility, and the whole process from start to finish for both internal and external candidates. And do remember, your internal need to be treated in pretty much the same way as your external to ensure that they're the right people on the right program. And on this slide, I've listed a number of the things that our providers help us with and has been exceptionally helpful. And I would say the assessment centre particularly, and I know Kirsty's going to talk about that in a little while, but having their technical input to help us with the shortlisting for it, but also the design of the activities, the guidance to hiring managers and the assistance in actually making those decisions at the end of it, that has worked exceptionally well. You do need to think about some of the key people in your organisation that you can turn to for support. Now, we're a big organisation, so we have some specific roles and quite a lot of expertise in our business. If you're a smaller organisation, then you're not going to have these different roles, but you're probably going to find the expertise is still there nonetheless. So we felt it was really important that we had key people to work with us to fully understand what apprenticeships were all about. And that meant bringing them into the programme really early on. It does mean that we're constantly doing awareness raising sessions on the standards themselves, because new standards are coming in all the time. We're becoming more knowledgeable about how endpoint assessment works, for example, and we can share that information to help line managers and apprentices become more prepared for that. how apprenticeships fit within career development and other L&D opportunities in the business. So we are constantly doing that communication internally around the whole recruitment, selection and career development piece, which means then that hiring managers are more knowledgeable to decide whether a role is appropriate for an apprenticeship and whether they have the expertise to support a potential apprentice and can certainly support the 20% off the job. So here I've pulled out 3 key roles. Kirsty, who is our talent acquisition person who works closely with me. Again, couldn't do it without her. So she's become a little bit of a whiz on funding rules around eligibility and initial assessment. Hiring managers, obviously, and that again is the hiring managers for new roles, but also the line managers for existing staff that wish to do an apprenticeship, and the HR business partners, who are again absolutely critical in ensuring that the communication around apprenticeships is always there, that they bring that into performance discussions, that they're talking about it with senior directors within our divisions in terms of workforce development. And they also are now very closely working with our training partners. So if there's any questions at all about a job role potentially for an apprentice, then straight away they pick the phone up and talk to our training partners and ask them their opinion on whether the job advert needs to be tweaked or anything like that. And that's my input on the strategic side of things.
Thanks, Anne. So now I'm going to talk through the Pearson approach. The key stakeholders very much are the HRBP, talent acquisition, hiring manager and the training provider. And you'll see that intertwined in the process that we use. So the way that we approach the recruitment for apprenticeships, often when a new role becomes available, we analyse to see if this role could be a potential apprenticeship. Quite often, as Anne mentioned again, it'll be dependent upon the level of the role. A lot of our apprenticeships are for the more entry-level positions. So when we're having that discussion, the discussion is really with the hiring manager, the HRBP. Once they've decided, yes, this role could be a potential apprenticeship, they might bring in the apprenticeship team and the training provider to think about what qualification would be appropriate for this particular position. So once all of that's been decided and the job description is ready to go, the same with standard recruitment, we still need the role to be approved. So it would be uploaded into our internal system and it would be approved, checking against headcount and finances, and then the talent acquisition team would be notified that the role is live. Once we know that the role is live, I would have a more in-depth discussion with the hiring manager. We would often bring in the training provider into this section as well, so that we can really understand exactly what the job entails and have a conversation with the hiring manager around what it is we're looking for and how we maybe need to adapt our approach for recruiting for an apprentice over a regular recruitment process. Some of the things that we would consider would be the sourcing strategy, the selection process, and the assessment process. So with the sourcing strategy, if we're recruiting for level 3 entry-level positions, this might be slightly different for if we're looking for more sort of graduate level positions. We are also reaching out to schools, to school leavers. So as Anne mentioned, we're actually using a site and an app to upload our vacancies to reach out to some school leavers. Also, we might be connecting with certain charities to reach out to hard to reach candidate pools. We're also looking at other advertising routes, such as our training providers. They advertise on their websites. We also put our roles onto the national apprenticeship websites, our company website, LinkedIn, and other aggregators, so your standards with regards to Reed, Indeed, those types of websites. We will also have a more in-depth conversation with the hiring manager around the selection process, and I'll go into a bit more detail into that in the next slide. And again, we need to think about the assessment. We might be looking at assessment centres rather than the standard sort of 2-stage interview process with apprenticeship recruitment. So once we've advertised the position, we have all of our applicants come through to our central candidate tracking system, so Pearson's central candidate tracking system. From these, I would, as Anne mentioned, I've learned more about the funding and the eligibility criteria. I would do a long list from all of the applicants that have come in, and I would consider things around, have they been in the UK and the EU for 3 years? Do they already have too much experience within this particular field? Have they already done a qualification in what the apprenticeship will be focusing on? So for example, if somebody has already had 3 years of marketing experience, then maybe an entry level 3 standard would not be appropriate for this candidate. Or if they've done a master's in marketing, then a level 3 standard in marketing might not be appropriate for that candidate. So once I have checked, I've created this long list. As Anne mentioned, the training provider is really an amazing support that we have. So just to double check that we're really fine against the eligibility for the funding, I would send that long list over to the training provider to confirm that those candidates are eligible. The hiring manager would then review the applicants and they would create a shortlist and prioritise the applicants. After that, there's a couple of ways that we would approach how we're going to screen those applicants further. So we've actually started using video interviewing. And so the hiring manager records themselves asking the interview questions. We send that out to the candidates and the candidates respond with a videoed answer. We score those responses and we select the candidates for the assessment centre. Think about though, if you're using video interviewing, if it is right for the role, certain candidates will respond far better to video interviewing than others. If we've had quite techie roles, then some candidates haven't even wanted to respond using the video interviewing. So just ensure that it is appropriate for the position. Again, training providers can support. Another option would be that they conduct the telephone screenings and they would do the shortlisting and recommend who would be eligible to attend the assessment centre. And then once we have our final selection, we would then invite candidates to the assessment centre. As Anne mentioned, again, the training providers are involved in the assessment centre and they support with the calibration at the end of the assessment centre as well, giving some advice to hiring managers on the sort of successful traits of the applicants. So as I mentioned, we have a more detailed conversation with the hiring managers around the difference between recruiting an apprentice over recruiting standard entry-level role. So it really is all about having a bespoke approach. And some of the key factors that we speak to the hiring managers about are checking things like the job description, making sure that they have thought about when the candidate receives it, when they read it, they really know what they're going to be doing within that role, that they've removed any business jargon and any acronyms and thought about the essential criteria and removed things like having a degree or a certain amount of experience required. We would also ask them to have an open mind when they're reviewing the CVs and look for potential over experience. A cover letter is an essential part of the application, so it really gives a lot more context around why the applicant is applying for the role and why they're suitable for the position. We also look for things on their CVs such as if they've done any blogs, if they've done any extracurricular activities that are appropriate for the role, if they've been in any groups, if they've done any volunteering experience. All of this builds up to a really good candidate. Also, as mentioned, we need to think about the recruitment process and how we're going to assess the candidates and what we're going to put into the assessment centre. To go into the assessment centre in a bit more detail, the format that we follow, and there will be a timetable displayed later for you to see, but the format that we follow would be to have a welcome presentation. The welcome presentation is for your brand awareness. Every applicant that comes in to the assessment centre is a potential for the future. You're only going to select one candidate, but you want all of those applicants to leave thinking, I want to work at this company. You want them to go away with a really positive view. Also, it's an opportunity to obviously go through the role in more detail, the company and the apprenticeship and the training. As mentioned, the training provider will be attending, so it's a good time for them to be able to talk about the training element and the apprenticeship itself. We also would then ask the candidates to do an individual task. We always advise the managers and their teams are the ones who actually create the tasks. They make them based upon the role itself. So we have, if for example we've had a marketing role, we've had very basic marketing individual tasks or editorial prioritization tasks. But don't forget, we're not looking for the perfect candidates here, we're looking for potential. We would also do a group task, and the group task has shown some really key skills from the candidates. It helps with not just looking at the communication, but also helps with looking at the skills required for the role. So if they're going to be doing a project management apprenticeship, Then have a scenario where they have to demonstrate their project management skills as well as their communication skills, their budgeting skills, their business acumen. It's a really great way to assess more than just the basic communication. Things like the survival task and the desert island tasks, really something more relevant to the role is what we use now. Also think about the scoring of these tasks. It's very important to have a clear scoring matrix for each of these, so we're scoring candidates as fairly as possible. Then, of course, you have the interview. Again, we tailor our interview, as Anne mentioned, we tailor our interview and we look at using more scenario-based questions, some more strengths questions, because of obviously the candidate potentially not having as much work experience. So we ask them to draw on experiences from their school, from their hobbies, and any extracurricular work activities they've done. This feedback is also critical. When we give feedback to the apprentices, the whole process is a learning process. So we give them a synopsis feedback on each stage of the assessment centre. And here is the example of a timetable for you to review later. And then just to remember, just a note on this, I'm not saying that I'm the expert. However, if you are going to be, as I mentioned, we are reaching out to school leavers, so some might be under the age of 18. And just to think about the safeguarding elements of this, think about where the interviewers, how they're going to get there. You might even need to consider the monetary side of it. Will they have the money to get to the assessment centre? Would you want to reimburse it? We have a safeguarding officer that we would reach out to for advice, but potentially your companies do as well, or HRBP or the government website. So just in summary, key factors to remember are to get a clear definition of the role and the job description, then to tailor the recruitment process to the level of the apprenticeship, and look for a potential. We're really looking for potential with apprenticeship candidates rather than clear experience. Feedback is critical, and to keep an open mind for the experience. We change our assessment centres each time, and we continue to review and try to improve them. So yeah, they're really an organic process.
Thanks for that, Kirsty and Anne. We now have an opportunity for some questions on either of the first two parts of the presentations. Are the colleagues involved in the assessment centres given training at Pearson?
Before we start the assessment centre, I'll speak with all of the managers and all of the people involved, because there's multiple interviews happening at once. So we need to make sure that everybody has had the same level of training. So yes, we offer our hiring managers to have some recruitment training with our L&D team.
Could I just sort of add as well that we have some templates that we use as well to ensure that we've got a standardised process for everybody involved.
Okay, thanks for that. So if there are no more questions coming in, then we will move on to Scott's part of the presentation, where he's going to talk about Babington's approach to recruitment.
Hi everyone, thank you Kirsty and Anne. So I'm going to build a little bit on what Anne and Kirsty have just run through. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, from a training provider perspective, our standard recruitment process, along with how we adapt the process to an employer's needs. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of good information, advice and guidance as well. Mostly from a candidate perspective, but from an employer perspective as well, this is quite important. Just before I dive into that though, I'll just go on to a little bit about Babington. We're an award-winning independent training provider with national delivery capacity. We deliver a range of qualifications with Pearson at the moment. So we do project management, leadership and management. We do some business administration. We do sales. So we do a whole host of programs. We've been around for some 40 odd years now, been consistently given a good rating by Ofsted, with features of outstanding in our accountancy and financial services. And we've got some strategic partnerships with some large bodies as well, like the Chartered Management Institute, as well as the Chartered Institute of Insurance. I think it's 400 plus employees now, supporting some 7,000 plus apprentices across coming up to 3,000 organisations as well. Just to talk a little bit about our standard recruitment process. Now I say standard recruitment process, but this varies depending on the employer. But these are the elements that run throughout any of the recruitment process that we tend to use. The first part, and I know Kirsty and Anne have already mentioned this, is the line manager guidance. So with this, we tend to go through a bit of a briefing with all the line managers that are going to be potentially taking on an apprentice. So we debrief them what an apprenticeship entails and how they tend to work. So a lot of people tend to have views and opinions on apprenticeships already, so we just need to manage those expectations, particularly with the performance of an apprentice as well. So for example, as an apprentice, they tend to be quite young people, they tend to be quite new to the working world, so we wouldn't expect them to come in and just start hitting full KPIs and targets immediately. It is a training role, it is a learning role, so it's important to manage the expectations of the line managers that will be taking on those apprentices. And that obviously leads to the next point about discussing the support that the line managers will put in place. And that links in quite well with the apprenticeship training, as well as the 20% off the job training as well, which is obviously a mandatory element now for any apprenticeship. So we talked to them about what can and can't be used as 20% off the job training. And I know Pearson are quite good at integrating this within their apprenticeships as well. So then we move on to agreeing the job specifications and the apprenticeship programs. Again, Kirsty commented on this as well. So we make sure that the role is suitable for an apprenticeship, make sure that their standards aren't going to be too high. And then if that's all good and the programs are suitable and they fit the role well, we advertise the role on a variety of sites that are targeted those interested in apprenticeships. Then we filter applications based on initial criteria. For example, the qualifications or grades, if the employer is requesting those. And then the fun bit starts. So the IAG and the phone screening, information, advice, guidance and phone screening. This tends to be the most important part when looking at applications and candidates for us. So we go through eligibility first and foremost, make sure they can actually do the apprenticeship. We talk to them about distance as well and travel arrangements. So I've had it in the past where people have applied and they've been 250 miles away and with no intention of moving. So filtering that out early is quite important. And we reiterate the details about the company, the job role on offer. I go through an overview of the apprenticeship, the working hours and the wage. A lot of the time when I ask people if they remember applying for the role, they say, I've applied for that many roles. I don't remember. So it's important just to make sure that they're aware of the role that they actually are applying for. And then we discuss future prospects as well within the company. So we talk to them about maybe previous apprentices that have gone on to do good things, or what career prospects there are within companies like Pearson. So a lot of the time, if you're looking for a good candidate, they're going to be interested in those elements anyway. Then we go through some typical interview questions as well within the phone screening. So we ask them why they've applied, we ask them about the long-term career prospects. These answers form a good understanding of the type of candidate that they are, so it allows us to assess the quality of the candidate as well at an early stage. Obviously, it doesn't give an exact idea of the quality, but it gives a good indication. So if somebody applies, for example, I ask them why they applied and they say, oh, it's because I don't know, I'm not sure, I've always wanted to be a doctor, and they've applied for a business administration role. That sort of flags things quite early in terms of their suitability for this role. And that allows us to obviously open, honest dialogues as well. So I'll talk a little bit about that later in the section about the importance of good IAG. And with the interview questions and the phone screening, it's a chance for us to offer feedback. So as Kirsty mentioned, feedback in all forms is important. Again, a lot of these people are young, they're not sure what they want to do in the future. It might be their first interview or assessment centre, so it's important that we offer feedback in any way, shape or form to allow them to improve on themselves. And any good candidate would be willing to improve on themselves. Then we ask them a little bit about any additional support or requirements for an interview, request their CV and send that over to the employer along with a couple of sentences about how they came across. And at that point, that's where the employer would shortlist, deciding who they want to arrange interviews for, and then we would provide feedback on those that have been unsuccessful at that stage. That tends to be the general process that we follow. It does vary wildly depending on the employer and their needs. So these are just a couple of examples of how we've adapted the process in the past with some of the employers that we work with. So with the phone screening form that I mentioned, we don't often tend to send that over to employers, only in circumstances where they've requested it or if they want to see the answers to questions that they've given. And we allow them to add some additional questions to that screening form as well. So if the company is looking for an IT specialist apprentice, then maybe we would ask them questions about what they know about certain hardware or programming languages, if it's software development. We also organise English and maths assessments prior to interview as well with some of our employers. So the English and maths assessments, some candidates may not have studied English or maths for quite a long time, or they may have lost their certificates. So we use English and maths assessments to see what kind of level they're currently working at, which is quite important, especially if they're going on to a higher level apprenticeship. The assessments just to stress, they're not used as a way to exempt people from applying, but rather to ensure that as a training provider, we can put the necessary support in place if the candidate was successful in the role. Then there's tailoring the assessment centres. Again, this is just building on what Kirsty spoke about earlier. So I'm sure you can imagine assessment centres for customer service roles will differ vastly from ones for IT-based roles or software developer-based roles. So customer service ones are going to focus more on interpersonal skills. IT ones will probably focus more on logical thinking and problem solving. It's important that as a training provider, we help people to stay grounded with these assessment centres. And again, like what Kirsty was saying, focus on a candidate's potential. With specialist roles like IT, you'd ask them to look for problem solving and logical mindset, but you shouldn't exclude somebody just because they don't come across as very confident. And for, again, young people, it's their first interview or assessment centre, so confidence and interpersonal skills tend to come with time. I'm sure we can all remember when we were young and we was socially awkward, but it's just keeping an open mind and making sure that the candidates do have the potential rather than looking at their current ability. So then we've also in the past looked at second interviews as well as first interviews. The first interviews could be a general screening for the employer. Then you could have second interviews with, say, a HR business partner. In addition to that, we have some companies that arrange trial days as well. So they get interviews in for a paid trial, maybe a few days, so that they can get a feel for what the company's like, what it would be like to work for them. And again, it's that two-way street that's important. So as well as you looking for the right candidate, you have to keep in mind that the candidate is also looking for the right employer as well. So an apprenticeship, the idea of an apprenticeship is that it's to kickstart a career. So the candidates can be just as selective as employers can. Last one about eligibility checks is where we probably have the least involvement. So some employers prefer to have full control over their screening and recruitment process. And we just dip in to do eligibility checks. So we tend to offer guidance from this about this from the start. So we advise employers on what the typical requirements for eligibility. So the right to work in the UK, if they've been a member of the EU for at least the last 3 years, and a few other things. So we tend to jump in there when there's unique scenarios that they might not know the answers to. So that's a bit about how we've adapted the process before. Just coming back to the information, advice and guidance. Now, we tend to integrate this within the phone screening for quite a few reasons. The main reason is it helps candidates to better prepare for interviews. Again, first interview, first assessment centre. So it allows us to advise them to research the company, look at the job prospects for the sector, and then with the interview questions that they gave us, offer advice on some of the best answers to give, or if they're a little bit, if they're not as confident, then obviously providing feedback and advice is a good way to boost their confidence prior to any interview or assessment centre that they might attend. And it also ensures that the candidates who are applying are doing so because they have a genuine interest in the role. Again, I've spoken to countless people before that apply for roles because they've been told by others that it's a good industry to get into, not because they've done their own research. I usually ask them to look into it themselves before going ahead with the phone screening and rescheduling for a few days later. One of the questions we ask is, what do you know about the sector? Which is difficult to answer if obviously you haven't done your own research and other people are putting words into your mouth. Most important part about the IAG as well is it allows better matching for candidates. As I mentioned a minute ago, it opens up honest dialogues. We do ask the candidate what their long-term career prospects are and what they're hoping to do in the future. It's quite common for younger apprentices to answer with, oh, I'm not entirely sure what I want to do in the future, which from our point of view is absolutely fine because not many people that age know what they want to do for the rest of their lives particularly. And again, it's about keeping an open mind and looking for potential in a candidate. If they're looking for an employer that they can kickstart a career with and they're quite open-minded themselves, then I think it should be reciprocated with employers that are looking for apprentices. However, what we don't want to hear is somebody applying for a business admin role and telling us that all they've ever wanted to do in life is be a dentist. So it's about finding out why they've applied and opening up those dialogues to maybe recommend them to other roles or other avenues that might be better suited for their interests or passions. That sums up pretty much about our standard recruitment process that we have, along with a couple of examples of how we've adapted the process depending on the employer needs.
So we've actually had a couple of questions come in while you were speaking, Scott, but I feel like they are potentially going to cut across all the presentations, so I might save them for the end, just so that everyone gets a chance to potentially answer them. But now's the time if anyone else has any questions specifically related to what Scott's been talking about to pose those. Otherwise, we'll move on.
Just to introduce myself, I am Zara and I am a resourcing advisor at BDO. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the way we kind of recruit apprenticeships, some of our attraction strategies, internal process, as much as how the candidates see it as well. So I just want to start with an overview of who we are. So BDO is the 5th largest accountancy firm after the kind of big four, so a mid-tier firm, but offering the same kind of services that they do. We do operate in 162 countries with 1,400 offices worldwide. Early in career is what we brand our kind of, some people call it emerging talent. Historically, you would have seen it as graduate recruitment or campus recruitment, but that does open it up to all of the programs that we do offer, which includes apprentices. So at the moment, it's the school leaver program, but we are changing that to apprentices to be more within the market. We've got graduates, summer internships, and summer school candidates. Now, just to pick up on summer school candidates, they will usually be in year 12 going into their penultimate year of university, and then we hope that they go into their final year and then we convert them into apprentices. They can apply within these 4 business streams, so that's tax, audit, advisory, and business services and outsourcing. I just wanted to do also a little bit of a comparison for graduates versus school leaver programs, because again, historically, that's what we would have looked at more and had experience in. So how does it differ at BDO? So they're trying to bring it closer together. So historically, our apprenticeship program, school leaver program, would have been 5 years. It's now 4 years compared to the graduates who do a 3-year training contract. So they're bringing it closer together, and it does mean that the school leavers will generally be qualified younger than the graduates will have, having gone to university first of all. In terms of the actual work that they do, they are sent on client straight away. So I always tell them that they won't be making coffee, they won't be doing any filing. They will be given the opportunity to get really involved and know what a career in their said stream will actually look like. We do say that, it's performance-based rewards throughout the program and a generous, flexible benefits package. So it's the whole sort of earn while you learn, so to speak, which is the appeal of this, being able to say that you're qualified within 4 years. The encouragement and support to drive your own career. So in terms of the exams and things they do, so there's always support, study leave and days like that for them to really feel supported, just having come out of school. In terms of the qualifications, I'm not going to go too much into detail about this because I don't want to confuse everyone and I don't know how relevant it will be. But the 80% eventually go on to do their ACA qualification, which is globally recognised. School leavers will usually start on CFAB or AAT. Again, it is globally recognised. They will qualify as a chartered accountant, debt-free. We pay for their exams and learning. And generally, the actual learning is moving more to online, but there are college days as well that they go to. Our school leaver program, we offer the level 7 apprenticeship. That is equivalent to a master's degree. I'm not going to go through all of those acronyms because you won't know what I'm talking about. So that's the main appeal, that we do offer the highest level of qualification. They are able to develop skills and knowledge and behaviours in the workplace. So a lot of them not having had the experience in that kind of environment before, so in a corporate environment, they will be able to learn essential skills, carrying them forward in their work life. These are a few statistics that I thought I would share as an overview on last season and our kind of numbers. We hired 102 apprentices to start in September 2018 across all regions. Our regions are London, the South, East Anglia, Midlands and the North. So I personally service the North. On average, we get around 1,168 applications. I can speak for my areas myself. In the North, when I say in places like Manchester, for example, I'm likely to get around 100 applications. Now, I'll go through in a second the process that they go through and how we kind of work with our model and selection process. We use CAT strength assessment model, apologies Babington, at all stages of the process. So that's our training provider. And I'll explain what that looks like, because I know the others have gone into a little bit of detail on what their recruitment process entails. So for candidates, they will make an application, and obviously we do have an eligibility criteria, which is based on GCSEs in maths and English. So it's A star to C, as well as 3 A levels, A star to C, or international equivalent. So things like Scottish Highers, and if you've graduated in a different country. And in terms of graduate switch is a 2-2, but we don't need to cover that in this session. After that, they go on to do 3 online tests. These tests are situational, critical reasoning, and numerical, and they will all be managed by CAP, and at the moment it's a fairly automated process. We often advise them when they come to insight days and things like that there are plenty of online practice sessions that they can do before they actually do the real thing, but a lot of them would have done these kind of processes before, and hopefully career advisors and things like that would let them know. Then they have the video interview. Now it's a little bit different to, I guess, how Pearson run it. So our video interview is automated, so there isn't someone at the other end of the screen. It is automated. However, we do have a team that screen those video interviews based on CAP strength model. And then the final stage for them is the assessment centre. So that is the part that I myself facilitate in the North regions, and that I'll go into a little bit of detail about that. The assessment centre consists of a group exercise, a written exercise, and an interview. So they all go through the same process because it needs to be fair and consistent for them all. And then that leads to our hiring decision. This is what our apprentice recruitment strategy looks like internally. A new role is presented by the business to HR. Then it goes through a HR approval process, so needs sign off by the leadership team. That means then it comes to us, which is the resourcing team. So we will advertise with our marketing team on multiple platforms, things like LinkedIn, Milk Round, the government websites obviously as well. Applicants are selected on their grade criteria and complete a series of online tests. Then we've got the video interview screening, which the team do, and the assessment centre, which we would pick up. The candidates are offered on the basis of their performance in the AC, so that's not taking into account anything before that, so any scores that they've received in online testing or anything like that. Then the final process for us is giving them feedback and sending contracts. Some of our attraction strategies, so we've got a dedicated marketing team. We go to career fairs, that's usually for graduate. In terms of schools, there is a completely different strategy, and that's usually based around skills workshops and insight days. So just as an example of a skills session we ran recently at a school in Gunnersbury. So we were invited in by a careers advisor, and we went through and we did some classroom sessions on things like networking, employability, CVs, anything that we could offer from an industry perspective of what they should be doing, because at that age you can imagine that they would need some support around that. We invite them in for insight days that we run every month. Marketing to key demographic as well as parents and career advisors. With this key demographic group, it would usually be parents and career advisors and teachers as well. That would be the key influences in their lives. So it's about the whole education piece for them as well. So specific job boards, all about school leavers and Milk Round as examples. There are plenty of affiliations, so Young Professionals and Rate My Apprenticeship are ones that we work with. There are others, Class Careers also, so there are plenty of affiliations that have the wider reach that you might need to target this market. That's me. Apologies for going over time, but has anyone got any questions?
Thanks for that, Zara. That was very good. So rather than have a dedicated Q&A for your presentation, we're just going to dive straight into the Q&A for the webinar as a whole. So I have a few questions for the panel. We've had a question about sharing templates that we've used in the assessment centre. We're not 100% sure what that means, but the template timetable that was shared on obviously one of Kirsty's slides will be available as part of this presentation. Any other templates in relation to what we do, we'd need to have a think about what we could share. We do seem to get quite regular requests for templates during these webinars, so we need to possibly have a think about the kind of materials that we could produce to supplement them. But at the same time, balancing that against us wanting to encourage employers to take their own, tailor things to their own needs. So we'll get back to you on that one. We've got another question, or potentially several questions in one, about a small provider, so I'll just read that one out. We are a small provider who sign up learners to apprentices who are already in a job role, so the route in is slightly different. Very often they are taking on the apprenticeship because the qualification within it is mandatory to their job role, so again the route in is slightly different. Any advice on the recruitment process from this perspective? Something we struggle with is conducting initial assessments prior to sign up, as this is a cost to us to go out visiting learners face to face who may not get signed up. Any suggestions around this? So I will now throw that open to the panel.
We actually use a tool called BKSB, and where we're recruiting internal people, we actually ask that line managers give that internal candidate time to do the initial assessment and the diagnostic assessment. So a little bit of like exam conditions to ensure that they've got the time to work on it. Works reasonably well. But I noticed your point was how you could sort of save costs on not going out into the workplace. But certainly it's a really good way to get line managers involved in the programme right from the word go, to be honest. And obviously with doing the initial assessment, that needs to happen well before you actually sign them onto programme.
Okay, thanks for that, Anne. Hopefully that answers your question. As I mentioned, we will publish a Q&A document afterwards, capturing all of these. Another question is, do any of the companies today use the National Apprenticeship website, as that has a bespoke application form that you can only put 2 additional Q on? Q presumably is questions. So again, throwing that open to the panel. I think Anne has nominated Scott for this one, so Scott, if you don't mind.
That's fine. So yeah, we do use the National Apprenticeship website. It's now known as the Recruiting Apprentice website from a training provider perspective, and Find an Apprenticeship website from a candidate perspective. Yeah, the application forms on there. Some employers do request those at the recruitment stage as well. So as well as a copy of the CV, we'd send them a copy of the application form anonymously, of course. But the 2 additional questions, or obviously the questions on the application form that you can put on the advert, is limited to 2. But we can circumvent that by not putting any questions on the advert, but then asking the questions through the screening process, so we can have 3-4 questions maybe. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, thank you, Scott. That did seem to answer the question. Another question is, I'm not entirely sure who runs the assessment centres. Is it the apprenticeship provider or the employer?
So our assessment centres are run by our managers. So the hiring managers will be involved, as there can be multiple interviews happening at one time. So there might be the hiring manager and some of their team. Talent acquisition also attend as an additional support. And then we also have the training providers there. So the assessment centres do require a number of people to be involved, and they are an all-day process. And admittedly, there is some work to go into it, but I just feel like you get a far better result with the quality of candidate that you recruit.
So really it's employers own the assessment centre?
Yes, the employers own the assessment centre.
Okay, thanks for that, Kirsty. We have one final question, which is, will there be notes available? I'm assuming that means on what the presenters have spoken about today. We will have a recording of this webinar, which will obviously include everything that was said. A copy of the slides will also be available, as will a Q&A document. In addition to that, we don't provide any speaker notes or anything like that. So if I've understood the question correctly, then I hope that answers it. Otherwise, you can get in touch to clarify further. So finally, thank you to all the presenters today, and thank you for attending. That concludes the webinar. Thank you for attending, and we hope to see you again in future for future instalments in the series.